Are live.
We're live again.
Hello, everyone. Jonathan Enders with the Stern team. We've got Russell Fawcett here as well. Today, we're going to be going over renting versus owning here in Salt Lake City and what the differences are, benefits, positives, and everything about that. So, Russ, start us off. What are some of the benefits of home ownership versus renting a home?
Yeah, I think there's a ton to list, right? And we'll go through it. I think the biggest thing right now is what people are looking at is, unless you're coming in with like probably a 20% down payment, a lot of the times it's actually your payment in rent right now is less than what your mortgage is because of the raised interest rates. And so I think people are thinking, they're really starting to think short term as far as like, okay, I'm going to rent because it's more affordable to rent right now. And they don't think long term. So the first thing I would say is, with getting a home, you're able to lock in essentially your cost of living today. So even though today it might be more affordable, or that monthly payment might cost a little bit less on renting, historically rents typically raise about 3% per year. And so where your mortgage isn't going to change, if you're on a standard 30-year fix, your rent will increase year over year.
Well, and I was reading Salt Lake City, you have a 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom studio. The only thing from April 2022 to 2023 that didn't increase was actually a 1-bedroom apartment here in Salt Lake City. Everything else has gone up dramatically. South Salt Lake was the highest year over year with a 20% increase in rents. And then there was Mill Creek at 16 and then Ogden at 15 there. So it's just.
So I saw like you said, 10 to 20% rent increases. Mm-hmm. So that's always, it's like, oh, if you want to continue to live here, completely fine. We love you as a tenant, and it's going to cost you 10% more next year.
Yep, exactly. What kind of financial considerations should you take into account when you're determining whether you should buy or if you should rent?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on that one is if you're looking long term, right? So we just kind of briefly touched on that monthly payment, right? So I understand why people are looking at that right now, as money might be a little bit tighter. If you're looking, and depending on the loan program that you get, you may have to have a down payment to get into a home, right? So do you have the money to be able to make that down payment? But now if we start looking on the other side, lock it in, know that your rent's going to go up. And as far as just some of the other things, the equity that you're going to start gaining in a home. So if you're ever thinking about, you're like, well, I don't have a down payment. Well, let's look at a program that can get you into a loan with very little or no money out of your pocket, and then be able to start using time to build equity in your home so that you can then sell that in the future, use that then as your down payment on the next one, right? So you don't have to start saving thousands of dollars every single month to be able to buy the next home. You can essentially let the equity do the work for you. The only thing I would say, especially in the market we're facing today, where we don't have rapid price increases, is that if you are thinking about, you're going to relocate out of the state in 1 to 2 years, mm-hmm. then renting might actually be the best choice for you. So if you're not going to live there long term or keep the home long term, then you probably should weigh, renting a little bit more heavily.
Do you feel like if people were coming in here, moving from California, moving from Wisconsin, Minnesota, or any of those places, would you recommend renting or buying to get started with?
For me, again, if you're able to communicate like what you're looking for, I still would even say like go ahead and buy, because again, if you put a down payment, that just increases your equity, right? Mm-hmm. So you could eventually sell that, or you could even rent out that home in the future if it didn't make sense to sell it. I also don't think that there's anything wrong with, though, if you're completely brand new to a community, to rent for a year, but that's more of a personal decision of making sure you understand where it is than making that decision based off of actually a financial decision. That's more of a personal decision. And then on that, I can completely understand why someone would choose to rent for
before they
6
buy.
months to a year before they buy.
You hit something just now, a little bit earlier. You talked about you don't need a very large payment, a down payment to get into a new home. Growing up, I always thought, hey, you got to have 20, 30% down payment, and you got to save up thousands on thousands and thousands of dollars just to get a home. Elaborate a little bit more on like the little down payment option.
Well, I mean, so I think the one that most people are most familiar with would be an FHA loan, right? So you're 3.5% down. And I know, like, so if you're following some financial people, they'll tell you, like, wait and save up till you have 20% down.
Mm-hmm.
The likelihood, though, that you're going to outsave the cost of, essentially the price of things going up, it's very rare that you can save faster than you will the price increases. So I'm actually, like, I'm okay if someone, get into a home with 3.5% down. That's what I did on my first home. Then again, in our market right now, depending on your price point in the home, you may still be able to even negotiate someone to pay your closing costs, right? So now you're just coming up with 3.5. Now here in Utah, if you couple that with a Utah housing loan, where your down payment, that 3.5, actually you borrow it and get a second mortgage, or if you qualify for some grants, there are ways that you can actually still get into a home with no money out of your pocket.
Very little. And there's a American Dream Grant going on right now here in Salt Lake. So a lot of different opportunities.
Right.
Now we hit a lot of different like financial stuff. Is there any other, economical benefits to home ownership in the long run versus renting?
Your biggest thing is your equity gain, right? So essentially the appreciation of a home. So if you take a standard, right now about $500,000, right, is what our median price. We're a little bit higher than that, but let's, for easy math, $500,000, if that home appreciates at the historical norm of 4%, I mean, what is that? Your $20,000 essentially you gained just from living in the home. And so as far as financially, if you look across America, most people, most of their wealth is actually from their equity in their home. And so I don't know the stat, I don't have it in front of me, but if you look at the net worth of a homeowner versus someone that's renting, it's substantially higher for those that actually own a home.
I've seen a lot of those graphics, just the disparity is just amazing between them.
So let's look at that, right? I mean, so if you bought in Salt Lake in 2018 and you saw those double-digit appreciations year over year, like someone that had a zero net worth 5 years ago probably has a net worth upwards of $200,000, and that literally was just from living in a house,
from owning a home. And that's a lot of people. Unless like you start a business, you invent something, most of your wealth does come from like owning a home,
right? Well, and so starting a business now, right? You could go out and sell the home, and now all of a sudden have the cash to start that business. You could take out a home equity line of credit, and you could even use that to buy another home. Like, as opposed to, again, on an investment property, you're going to need that, 20 to 25% down. There are some programs out there with 10%, but even 10%, you're talking about $50,000. And so we just talked about in a year, you gain 20%. What if we did that year over year over year? Now all of a sudden you can access the equity of your home to go buy a business or buy another home, and you didn't have to necessarily save that money in the bank.
That's so nice. In your opinion, what are some of the freedoms does owning a home provide, and why is that important to consider when you're looking to buy or rent?
Yeah, well, it just it allows you to make changes to the property without having to get approval from someone else. Like, so little things. I mean, if you look in a lot of the leases, like even painting a room, you would have to get approval, and then when you move out of the house as a rental, you've got to put it back to the way it was,
to the original condition.
Right. Or so, like, even just thinking about, if you wanted to add a fire pit in the backyard, or you wanted to, maybe you have a dog and you wanted to add a play area, or you're a gardener and you want to remove some of your grass and put in some garden boxes. Every single one of those is going to require your landlord's approval. And so it really, as a homeowner, you're free to do most of those things without anyone's approval. Now, if you live in an HOA, they might tell you like, no, like you can't do this. You have to have a certain amount of trees in the front yard, things like that. But they're usually outside of some crazy HOAs, which they do exist. You're able to essentially modify the home for what you want, right? Like I think about right now, in my home, we have a loft. And so we're talking about, okay, do we go ahead and change that loft into a bedroom so each one of the kids could have their own bedroom? I couldn't even have that discussion with, I mean, I guess I could go to the landlord, but they're not going to let you modify that to that extent. And if any of your modifications add value to a home, again, that is 100% an expense to you. You do not benefit. You are going to go spend that money. At the end of the day, the person that actually got the benefit was the owner of the home versus you as the tenant.
That just having that freedom to do whatever you want inside your home, it's got to be a great thing, and that's probably
right. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but like there are some, landlords that are going to tell you, you can't have a dog, or you can't have a cat, or you can only have one dog, right? And someone might want two. Yeah. And it's like, if they do allow it, it's going to come with an extra expense as well. They're not going to just allow you to have two animals without charging you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the hidden costs of renting. You hit with animals and stuff like that. Are there other different hidden costs that you have seen personally?
Yeah, well, I think so. It is dependent on lease to lease, right? But, we talked about, well, maybe it's less to get into a home or you don't have a down payment. I have literally seen leases where it's first month, last month, and the security deposit. So right there, if you think, $200 or $2,000 on a, typical rent. I mean, that's kind of average right now. I would say there's definitely more. There's a couple that are less. But if you were going to do a rental that was $2,000, so day one to move into the home, you've got to pay $2,000 for your first month, $2,000 for your last month, and then probably about the equivalent, $2,000. So now all of a sudden you're $6,000 just to be able to step foot in that house
to rent it. And then how much is a typical closing cost?
Yeah, you're going to be. I mean, it's anywhere from 2 to 3%. You're paying for your title fees and loan fees and different things like that. So typically they are going to be right around that same amount of the closing cost versus what it's going to cost you to get in. And then when you buy a home, the cool thing is like, so if I bought a home in the middle of, what are we in, April, if I bought a home now, I don't make a payment. I don't make a payment May 1st. My first payment's not actually due till June 1st.
Oh, wow.
And so where as a rental, right, you're going to pay that first month and you got a payment right away. If you're moving in the middle of the month, maybe they'll prorate it, but you're going to have that payment the very first of the next month. Other hidden fees, sometimes they charge you. So we talked about first month, last month rent. Normally they have a new tenant fee. That's just a fee to move into the house, an application fee, things like that. If you have animals, an additional pet deposit. Yep. Then there's going to be pet rent. So you're actually paying rent every single month to have them. Then when you move out of the home, anything that essentially it takes to get that home back to rent ready will come out of your deposit. So if they're painting walls, if they're patching holes because you mounted a TV, if they have to paint a room, those come out of your deposit. Like, so that is money that not only you paid to get in the home, but now you're paying to leave the house.
Yep.
Those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if you're aware of any other ones that maybe you've seen.
I know I've seen personally, like in the past with apartment complexes units, if you have a dog and you're out in the courtyard taking your dog at 10 o'clock at night, if you actually don't pick up after your dog, you'll get paid $200. You'll get a fine of $200 for not picking up after your dog. And then the first one's $200, then it's $500, and then it's $700. Yep. And that's just trying to make sure that you always pick up and they got the cameras out and everything.
Well, and then thinking about apartment complexes, right? So typically they'll advertise a certain thing. If you have access to a garage, like you're usually going to pay more to park in a garage. They might provide you with one parking spot, and if you want to be able to park 2 cars, you're going to pay for an additional
Another fee.
stall, right? So parking fees, I would say, is another one that could potentially be something that you don't think about.
And there's service fees. There's just unlimited amount of different fees
Right.
that people try to get you on. So my next question for you is, how does the length of time spent living in a rental or own property affect the monthly? How much is your monthly expenses affected if you would own versus if you would rent? You kind of hit it on it before about being fixed costs and stuff like that. Kind of elaborate a little bit more about if you would rent, 2-3 years from now, how much would your monthly expenses be?
Yeah, and so I don't know that I'll be able to do all the breakdowns and calculations immediately from here, and there are definitely calculators. I know our lender has a calculator that shows the difference between renting and owning, right? So we could actually plug in a scenario and give you exact numbers. The thing that I do know, again, though, is typically rents typically rise 3% per year. So your payment's going to go up every single year. So, yeah, it's 3% more next year, and then 3% more the next year. And so within, a matter of 3 years, you're now paying 10% more than when you first started living in that versus when you bought it. You know what that payment is. And that's the other thing is typically, leases will say they have the right to automatically raise the rent a certain fee.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean, though, at the end, your lease typically is going to be for 12 months.
Yeah.
So if the market does what it just did, there is also no protection for you for that landlord to say, hey, guess what? I'm actually raising it 15%. Mm-hmm. And you don't get a pick.
Like, you don't really have an option.
It is just flat out if you want to continue to live here. And so that's, again, another expensive. Okay, if you're not able to afford that or don't want to pay that for where you're living, now you've got the cost to move. Mm-hmm. You've got the move out expenses we just talked about.
Security deposits and
right.
Getting into a new place again and everything.
Right. And so really with owning, like you get that mortgage if you're on, a fixed rate, you know what that payment is. Like the only thing that's going to change is possibly your taxes as that goes up in value. But that's going to be, dollars or tens of dollars, maybe $100 total in a year. You might have some crazy years where maybe it does. Let's say all of a sudden your property taxes doubled. Mm-hmm. It's still probably less than what that rent increase would be
moving forward.
And like, again, it just now the other thing though, so you talk about that expense of like, okay, my payment went up. The other thing though, is if you wait for 3 years and say, I'm going to buy in 3 years. Well, now the home that you bought also has been going up or that you're going to buy
and appraising by that 5%
has been going up in value, right? So now the home that you could have bought today at $500,000 in 3 years is going to cost you $550,000 or $575,000, and so now your mortgage payment is going to be that much more because you're paying more for that house
than what if you would have just got into it,
right?
In your opinion, how do rental costs vary across markets in terms of fluctuality of in South Salt Lake, like I mentioned, went up by 20%. What do you think is the causes for some of those rental increase and spikes?
It's location. So yes, that's a broad statement, right? But that is 100%. It what is near it. So you could have a business that moves in. Yep. Right. So I look at Point of the Mountain, where before that was a long stretch between Provo and Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. Now you essentially had this tech boom that moved in. A lot of the tech companies are putting their offices right there at Point of the Mountain. So somewhere that was probably less desirable as far as a rental. Now you have people that are coming in from California and things like that. That all of a sudden that townhome that was maybe renting at $1,200-$1,500 that now all these top executives are coming in. It's proximity to what just came in, and that just doubled, like the rent. So I would say, proximity to entertainment or proximity to work. So what are the jobs around it, and then what is the development and growth around that mm-hmm. is going to affect that price, and then just flat out availability, right? So yes, if you're Saratoga Springs, Payson, like
be a little cheaper.
the rent's going to be less there, right? But as things continue to develop, because I look at, again, Northern Lehigh used to feel like Payson, right? As far as going to Provo or going to Salt Lake, you were 30 minutes out. And now it is right in the middle of some of the biggest growth we're seeing in the state.
And then even if you're thinking about renting and those prices, 20%, 50%, whatever the numbers are going year over year, the homes are probably doing the same thing in those very, very, sought after neighborhoods where it's proximity close, right?
No, for sure. And so I guess that would be the other thing, value of home, right? So if the value is going up, then naturally, people, especially if it's an investor that's buying it, and they're not paying cash, they have a mortgage they've got to cover, right? And so if the value of the homes went up, it's going to be like, okay, what is the difference between buying or renting in those areas? And typically your rents do run fairly close to, what that normal mortgage would be when you're comparing like today's rent versus today's mortgage with roughly a 20% down payment. That payment is actually very, very close, and a lot of the times that's because you're covering the landlord's mortgage, right?
Exactly.
But that means the landlord, they're buying to be able to eventually raise those, and so they got in when it was lower, raised the rents every single month, and now all of a sudden their payment stayed the same. The tenant's payment went up as the value continued to increase.
Because they just have the opportunity to, make money because they are running a business in it.
Right.
So in your opinion, kind of changing a little bit, is what are the lifestyle preferences, why people would choose to rent versus owning a home?
Yeah, I think, there's probably a lot. And honestly, my mentality is a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't ever picked lifestyle of renting over owning a home. I've owned a home for quite a while, but as I guess speculate on what some of those things would be, is first is picking the location, right? So you're moving into a new location, you don't know what's around.
Yep.
Part of it will come down to affordability, and not so much affordability on if I can make the payment, but if I can qualify for the loan, right?
Yep.
And so it's like, well, I want to live at the mouth of, one of the canyons, so I have access to biking and things like that. Maybe you can't afford it. And so literally you're moving in with someone, or there's no homes on the market available. Maybe it is, when we say lifestyle, maybe it's more your job could relocate you. So it's like, no, I'm only going to be here. I'm coming in for a project and I'll be moving back to where I'm going. And I think it is, like I said, there are instances, if you choose to go rent an apartment as opposed to buying like a single family home, yes, it is going to be cheaper. And so people might choose, well, I'm going to live somewhere smaller, more affordable, so that I can afford a bigger lifestyle, whether that be a car I drive, whether it be activities that I participate in. It's like, okay, I'm going to just go ahead and live somewhere that is cheaper and just base it solely on price. And then the other thing is just the flexibility, right? Of after a year, I can make another decision. Like, I'm not locked down and I don't have the stresses of actually selling a home at the end of my lease.
And I'm sure you've seen a similar report, but like millennials who are supposed to be in that big home buying phase right now, they're choosing to rent versus actually purchasing for that flexibility and freedom. Do you think there's any other reasons why they're choosing to rent versus buy at this current stage, where in past generations they would be buying in their 30s and 40s?
It would be the flexibility. Flexibility and affordability.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as why someone might, and I'd love to, if someone dropped it in the comments or even, reached out, maybe educate me a little bit of like why someone would choose to rent over buy, outside of, again, they don't qualify or they can't afford it. Like, that I get. Like, in some circumstances, it's like, no, I'm going to have to buddy up with someone to be able to afford this, right? I think the other thing, right, like, so if someone is single, right, going and renting a room
is a little easier.
Is easier than, going and buying a home. And, again, you could go buy the home and then rent out the additional rooms, but again, you have to qualify for that loan. And so I think it is just in my mind, and not to offend anybody, but I think it's short-term thinking of like, no, I want flexibility and I'm willing to give up some of the wealth creation that home ownership affords, to be able to have that flexibility of being able to move and live wherever I want. Maybe they work from home. They're like, no, I'm going to go ahead and live here for 6 months, 3 months, and then I'm going to go live in California. And if someone chooses that, like, cool. Like, I definitely, absolutely, like, don't care how people choose to live their lives. It's just, if you say, is this the best financial decision? My immediate answer would be no. Every situation is different, so I can't say that with 100% certainty that owning a home is the best financial decision for someone, because if it's going to make you cash poor and make it to where like you are completely strapped and you can't do anything, then I would say, yeah, maybe, renting is a good choice. But I still would say at that point, I'd like to talk with someone and come up with, more of a wealth strategy of like, how can we get you into home ownership so that it doesn't completely break the bank or feel like your house poor.
And you have the opportunity to rent that out. You buy it now, something close to you or any of the universities, and then you got yourself a rental unit for college students.
Yeah, there's always that opportunity to, house hack, whether it's, like I said, live there, rent out some of the rooms, maybe it's a duplex, rent out the other side, or just use that as a move up, right? Because your owner occupied loans are typically better rates and less money down than just buying an investment property. So if you're willing to, I think there may come a point with everyone that they're like, I'm not moving every 2 years so I can continue to acquire rentals. But there are some people that do that, and they've been able to build pretty big portfolios off of using primary, principal residence mortgages, and then just moving up and moving out to something else.
We kind of hit a little bit about the expenses. What are the different expenses if you were renting versus owning in terms of if something would happen, some of the benefits of both sides?
Well, and I guess that is one of the, benefits of the rental side, right? Is like most of your major repairs are going to be covered by the owner of the home.
That's correct.
So your furnace goes out, like that's not going to be a tenant responsibility. That's going to be the homeowner's responsibility. Your roof needs replaced. Again, that's going to be the owner's responsibility. Typically as a tenant, you're in charge of general maintenance. A light bulb goes out, you're probably responsible to fix the light bulb. I've seen both sides as far as yard maintenance, as far as whether that's tenant responsibility or owner responsibility, but most of your major repairs are actually the owner's responsibility.
And then if you're owning that home, your roof or you have a plumbing leak, all of a sudden we had it on our team recently, the entire basement was flooded.
Right.
That's all coming back on you, right?
Yep. Neglect, whether it's home ownership or rent, whether you're renting, right? You get mad, you punch a hole in the wall. You're paying for that, whether you're renting or a homeowner, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, any items of neglect or damage done by you living in the home, you have a dog, and it decides it likes to chew and destroys the blinds, whether you're a tenant or a homeowner, you're replacing those blinds.
Yep. Or in my case, I had it happen where she decided to chew up the entire floor of mine. So
you bought a new floor.
Pretty much, exactly. So we're getting close on time right now. So just final words. Do you have anything that we haven't mentioned today in terms of renting versus owning that you want the audience and people out there to kind of know the difference and why owning or renting would be better?
Yeah, again, I think my biggest thing is how long are you going to live somewhere? So if you're planning on making a move in the next 1 to 2 years, honestly, renting is a very good option, right? So I think that we look at timelines. If you're planning on being in an area a long time, like I really do think we should start talking about home ownership. And even if you're like, well, I can't afford anything that I like today, use a home and use time. Go get into a home that isn't your dream home, it's your first home. Use that to start building equity because, typically if you look at our inflation rates, over the last year, or the last 2 years, I guess, they went up drastically, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But one of the things that actually influenced that inflation was actually the price of homes. And so if you were on the other side and you actually owned a home, your home's value increased equally with the inflation. And so essentially you were able to keep up with inflation by home ownership. And so it's like, okay, now I actually, even though my price went, the price of the home went up and the home I want to buy next went up, I can actually go ahead and sell my home, use that as a down payment to get into the next one. So if you're waiting to be like, okay, I'm waiting till I have the money for a down payment, or I'm waiting for the market to crash, no one's able to predict
what's going
to happen. If that's ever going to happen. We've been saying, like, I swear every single real estate training that I've been to over the last 10 years was like, holy cow, we've had tons of appreciation. The market's going to correct. And then the next year, the market's going to correct. And we're always preparing for this correction. And we did actually see a correction last year. We saw it drop, and now we're actually going back up all the way, or we're going back up again. So it's just like no one can predict that future. But what I can tell you is the price of a home today, and again, outside of a complete meltdown.
Like an entire country meltdown
Right.
type level.
And honestly, COVID was kind of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we essentially corrected for about 6 months, and it really wasn't, COVID, we actually corrected in about 2 months. We snapped right back out of it. Raised interest rates, right? We went down for about 6 months, and now we're going back up. And so, like, we've had some, actually what I would classify as some pretty extreme things happen to our economy. And
prices,
like, we didn't crash.
Not like it was in 2008, right?
No. And so that could still happen. But if you bought a home, right before the crash in 2007, so before the market started going down in 2008, 9, 10, 11, if you bought a home in 2007, which would have been considered at the height of the market at that time, mm-hmm. that price versus the price today, like, you would be absolutely, ecstatic that you bought a home in 2007. And so, like, it is that if you're playing the waiting game, how long are you willing to wait? And if prices keep going up, what are you going to do that's going to change it so that you're not locked into renting the rest of your life? Like, you've got to get in at some point, and then you can start using equity gains over time to essentially allow you to move up.
Yeah, just as you said, it may not be your dream home, but you're, in a sense, you're saying, let's get ready for that dream home. So when time does come, you're not behind the 8 ball, 2, 3, 5 years, whatever that time frame is.
Right.
Awesome. Well, that is everything today for the Stern Insight on renting versus owning. Appreciate everyone joining in. Russ, final words?
Yeah, just if you are thinking about buying or selling, or if you've been kind of sitting on the fence, like, the best thing I would say to do is continue to get educated. Watch things like this. Talk to a real estate professional that can educate you on the market, because I do think that what's being broadcast in the news is actually, like, they broadcast a lot of doom and gloom versus taking your situation individually and actually creating the plan that helps you achieve both your short-term goals and long-term goals. So, and even, watching things like this on social media, right? Like, even that, I'm not taking in your individual situation into consideration. Like, we need to sit down and talk about your game plan. Then you can act with certainty, and what parts of the market to watch, or the different things that might influence your actual personal situation versus just taking social media or news headlines. The
clickbait headlines.
Right. But yeah, that's what I would have to say.
Awesome. Well, guys, next week we're going to be back on again, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you have any questions, send us a message through any of the channels. Otherwise, see you guys next week.
We'll see you. Thank you.